The night was drowning in snow when Jack heard it, a weak, trembling cry beneath the storm's roar. He stopped his truck, followed the sound, and found a tiny puppy half buried in the snow, its golden eyes barely open, its heartbeat fading. Without hesitation, he wrapped it in his jacket and whispered, "You're safe now." He thought he had rescued a helpless creature fate had abandoned. But he was wrong. In the months that followed, strange things began to happen. Claw marks appeared on his walls, haunting sounds echoed through the woods, and the puppy he saved began to change in ways no animal ever should. When the truth finally came out, it left everyone speechless, because what he had saved that night was never a dog at all. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind screamed across the frozen landscape that night, howling through the mountains like a living thing. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, his headlights cutting through sheets of falling snow. He'd seen blizzards before, but this was different. The kind of storm that swallowed sound and light, turning the world into a blinding white void. His truck tires skidded slightly, and his heart pounded as he slowed down. He was miles from town, alone on a road that hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. Then just as he rounded a curve, he saw something, a faint, flickering movement against the snowdrift. He squinted, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. He stopped the truck, the engine's hum fading under the roar of the wind. When he stepped out, the cold bit instantly into his skin. Snow whipped across his face as he moved toward the small shape lying near the roadside. It was barely visible, a tiny mound trembling. As he knelt down, he realized what it was. A newborn puppy no bigger than his hand, half buried in the snow. Its breathing was shallow and its fur, pure white, blended almost perfectly with the storm around it. Jack's chest tightened. "Oh, you poor thing," he murmured, gently scooping it into his gloved hands. The creature was ice cold, its heartbeat faint, but still there. Jack hesitated for a split second, glancing toward the dark woods beside the road. No signs of a mother, no tracks, nothing. Someone must have abandoned it. Or worse, it had wandered from somewhere impossible. He didn't think twice. He unzipped his coat and tucked the tiny body inside, close to his chest, shielding it from the freezing wind. "You're safe now," he whispered, pressing forward through the storm toward his truck. The little creature stirred faintly, letting out the softest sound, and not quite a whimper, but something deeper, almost a hum. Jack drove home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other feeling the fragile warmth inside his coat. The storm raged on, but inside the truck there was a strange calm, a sense of purpose. He didn't know it yet, but that night on that lonely snow-covered road, his life had just changed forever. The storm had calmed by morning, leaving the world wrapped in soft silence. Sunlight spilled weakly through Jack's cabin window, glinting off the frost-covered glass. He sat by the fireplace, cradling the tiny puppy in a wool blanket. Its body barely moved, its breath shallow and uneven. Jack had stayed awake all night, feeding it drops of warm milk through a small syringe and rubbing its paws gently to keep the blood flowing. Every now and then he'd whisper, "Come on, little one. You've got a reason to live." There was something about the creature that stirred something, old and protective inside him, like fate had placed it in his hands for a reason. Hours passed before the first flicker of movement came. The puppy's eyelids trembled and it let out a faint sound, half whimper, half sigh. Jack smiled for the first time in weeks. He placed the little one closer to the fire, wrapping it in his old scarf. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered, brushing a thumb across its tiny head. The creature shifted slightly, curling into the warmth. For a moment it looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, like it belonged to another world entirely. Over the next few days, Jack devoted every spare moment to the fragile animal. He built a small bed beside the fire, fed it on schedule, and even hummed softly when it whimpered at night. The cabin, once silent and lonely, began to feel alive again. Yet small oddities caught his attention. The puppy's eyes, when they finally opened, gleamed a shade of gold far too bright to be normal. Its heartbeat, and when Jack held it, felt strong, rhythmic, almost deliberate. But he brushed the thought aside. All he knew was that the creature he found in the snowstorm had brought warmth back into his life. For the first time in years, Jack didn't feel alone. What he didn't realize was that this was only the calm before the storm, and the thing he called puppy was far from ordinary. Weeks passed, and the quiet cabin that once echoed with wind now pulsed with life. The little creature grew faster than Jack could have imagined. What should have taken months happened in mere weeks. Its limbs lengthened, its body strengthened, and its fur thickened into a sleek, silvery coat that shimmered under sunlight. Jack often laughed in disbelief, shaking his head as he poured more food into the bowl. "You eat like a wolf," he'd joke. But beneath his amusement was a growing unease. Something about the puppy's growth wasn't natural. It wasn't just getting bigger, it was getting aware. By the third week, the creature could follow Jack's every movement with startling precision. It learned routines, waited by the door before walks, and even nudged the kettle when Jack forgot to make tea. At first, he found it adorable, a sign of intelligence. But there were moments that sent chills down his spine. Once, late at night, Jack woke to find it sitting by the window, staring out into the darkness. The moonlight hit its eyes, making them glow an unnatural golden hue. Its ears twitched as though listening to distant voices. When Jack called its name, it turned slowly, too slowly, and tilted its head in silence. Days grew stranger. Jack began finding claw marks on the wooden floor near the door, deep grooves as if something had tried to dig its way out. Food disappeared from the counter even when the creature hadn't moved from its bed. Once he heard growling, low, rumbling, not from outside, but from the dark corner of the room. He turned on the lamp and found the creature lying calmly, watching him with eyes that seemed to question his fear. Still, Jack couldn't bring himself to see it as anything but his companion. It had saved him from loneliness. When it rested its head on his knee, all his doubts faded. "You're my best friend," he whispered, scratching its neck. But deep down, he felt it, a silent distance growing between them. The creature was changing fast, too fast, and Jack was no longer sure what it was becoming. The days that followed brought a chill Jack couldn't shake, and it wasn't from the weather. The once quiet cabin had started to feel different, heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. The creature, now nearly the size of a grown dog, moved with eerie grace. It never barked or whimpered like normal dogs did. Instead, it made soft, throaty sounds that almost resembled whispers. Jack often told himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left him. One night, as the fire crackled low, Jack awoke to a sound, faint scratching at the door. He reached for his flashlight and looked around. The creature was lying in its usual spot near the hearth, motionless, eyes closed. The scratching came again, louder this time. Jack's pulse quickened. He slowly got up, walked toward the door, and opened it. The freezing wind rushed in, but there was nothing. No tracks, no movement, just the endless white. When he turned back, his heart skipped. The creature was now sitting upright, staring at him, its golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Over the next few days, more strange things began to happen. Jack found claw marks on the walls, deep, deliberate gouges that hadn't been there before. His tools were moved, and once he found his old hunting knife lying near the creature's bed, its handle covered in frost. At night, he heard low growls coming from outside, yet every time he stepped out, there was only silence. Despite the unease gnawing at him, Jack couldn't bring himself to drive it away. There were still moments, rare, fleeting, when it seemed innocent again, curling beside the fire like it used to. But those moments were fading. Each day, the creature's gaze grew more intense, more knowing. Jack tried to convince himself it was still his puppy, but deep down he could feel the truth pressing against his chest. Something was coming, and it was no longer just a feeling. The forest behind Jack's cabin had always been quiet, peaceful even, but lately it felt alive in a different way. The silence had changed. It wasn't calm anymore, it was watching. One night, while stacking firewood outside, Jack froze. From somewhere deep within the trees came a sound, a low guttural growl that didn't belong to any animal he knew. He turned slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. The creature, his companion, stood at the edge of the porch, ears pinned back, its golden eyes fixed on the darkness. Every hair on its body bristled. Jack felt it too, that invisible tension, the kind that made your instincts scream to run. Then, without warning, a massive shadow burst from the tree line. A wild boar, enraged and desperate, charging straight toward him. Jack barely had time to move before the creature he'd rescued lunged forward with impossible speed. The collision was violent, a blur of fur, claws, and snow. The sounds that followed made Jack's blood run cold. Snarls that were too deep, too guttural, and a sharp cry that didn't sound like any dog. When the chaos stopped, the boar lay motionless, blood steaming against the snow. The creature stood over it, panting heavily, its muzzle dark and wet. Jack stumbled back, his heart hammering. Hey, easy," he called out, voice trembling. The creature turned slowly toward him, its eyes burning with something wild, something ancient. For a long, terrifying moment it didn't move. Then, as if remembering him, it blinked and lowered its head, whining softly like a guilty child. Jack stood frozen, torn between fear and relief. It had saved his life, but at what cost? He approached carefully, laying a shaking hand on its back. Its muscles quivered under his touch. You saved me," he whispered, though his voice cracked. The creature looked up at him, expression unreadable. That night, as Jack buried the remains of the boar under the trees, he couldn't shake the image from his mind. Those glowing eyes, that unnatural strength. The truth was undeniable now. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a dog, and Jack realized for the first time he wasn't sure if he'd rescued it, or if it had chosen him. Jack couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the creature standing over the lifeless boar, its eyes blazing like embers in the snow. The sound of its growl still echoed in his head. By morning, the fear had turned into something else, a gnawing need to understand what he was dealing with. He had to know the truth. Over coffee gone cold, he opened his laptop and began searching. Everything he could: canine growth patterns, wolf hybrids, genetic mutations. But nothing explained what he'd seen. No creature should heal that fast, move that fast, or have eyes that seemed to glow without light. He called the local vet, Dr. Harris, a man who'd known him for years. "Bring it in," the vet said, though his voice held uncertainty. Later that day, Jack arrived with the creature on a leash. It sat calmly beside him, its composure unnerving. The clinic's fluorescent lights flickered as Dr. Harris examined it, his brow furrowing deeper with each test. This is strange," he murmured. "Its pulse is slower than a dog's, but its reflexes are faster. And its teeth," he paused, glancing up at Jack. "They're not shaped like any canine I've seen." Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. Dr. Harris hesitated. "I'm saying I don't know what this is." He ordered a DNA test, promising to call when the results came in. Days later, the phone rang, and his voice trembled. "Jack, the lab can't classify it. The genetic markers don't match any known species. It's something else." That night, Jack sat by the fire, staring at the creature sleeping peacefully at his feet. Under its fur, near the shoulder, he noticed something new. A faint, swirling mark, almost like a symbol. It pulsed faintly under the light. Jack leaned closer, his breath catching. "What are you?" he whispered. The creature's eyes opened, glowing softly, as if it had heard him. The mark beneath the creature's fur haunted Jack. He couldn't stop thinking about it. That swirling, almost tribal pattern that seemed to shift under the light. It wasn't natural. It looked branded, ancient, as if it carried meaning lost to time. Days turned into sleepless nights as Jack scoured books, old forums, and anything that might hold an answer. One evening, buried deep in an online archive, about extinct northern predators, he stumbled upon something. A mention of an Arctic species wiped out over a century ago. They were described as wolf-like, intelligent, capable of mimicry and extreme adaptation. Locals had called them lunaris beasts, guardians and omens. Jack froze as he scrolled. The sketch on the page looked exactly like what was lying by his fireplace. The next morning, he drove 3 towns over to meet Dr. Ilara Winters, a wildlife biologist specializing in genetic anomalies. When she examined the DNA results, her face paled. "These sequences, they're not fully canine," she whispered. "Whatever this is, it's older. something predating modern wolves. Jack leaned in, his pulse racing. You mean extinct? She nodded slowly, eyes still on the data. Extinct or hidden? Ilara inspected the photo of the mark on the creature's body. Her expression hardened. This symbol, it's not biological, it's ritualistic. These creatures were part of old northern folklore, said to be protectors of balance. But when humans began hunting them, they disappeared. Jack sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. The puppy he'd rescued might not have been born. It might have been reborn. That night, back in the cabin, the fire burned low. Jack sat across from the creature, unable to look away from its golden eyes. There was something human in that gaze, understanding, sadness, maybe even guilt. Then in the stillness, the creature made a sound. Not a growl, not a whimper, something between speech and sigh. Jack's skin prickled. It almost sounded like his name. Jack. He dropped the cup in his hand, heart pounding. The creature tilted its head gently, eyes soft, almost sorrowful. That was the moment he realized he hadn't found it by accident. It had found him. The storm rolled in without warning that night, thunder growling over the mountains, rain slashing against the windows. Jack sat in the dim glow of the fireplace, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Every flicker of lightning illuminated the creature's silhouette by the door. It was restless, pacing, its fur bristling as if sensing something unseen. Jack had never seen it behave like this. "What's wrong, boy?" he asked softly. But the creature didn't look at him. Its gaze was locked on the window and on the darkness beyond it. Then in a blur, it bolted out the door, vanishing into the storm. "Wait," Jack shouted, grabbing his coat and flashlight. The rain hit like shards of ice as he stumbled into the forest, following the faint trail of prints in the mud. The deeper he went, the louder the wind roared him until suddenly the world went still. Lightning split the sky, and there it was, standing in the clearing, drenched and trembling. Jack raised the flashlight, his breath catching in his throat. The creature turned, and for a moment its eyes glowed brighter than the storm itself. Then before his eyes it began to change. Its spine arched, bones shifting with soft cracking sounds. The fur along its neck shimmered like liquid silver. The air around it pulsed thick with energy. Jack stumbled backward, disbelief paralyzing him. The creature wasn't just growing, it was transforming. Its shape stretched, its limbs lengthening into something neither human nor beast. For a split second, Jack saw what it truly was, ancient, intelligent, sorrowful. It let out a sound that was part howl, part cry, echoing through the forest like a forgotten hymn. Jack dropped to his knees, staring, rain pouring down his face.
"What are you?"
he whispered. The creature turned its head slowly toward him, its golden eyes now soft, filled with something he couldn't name. Regret. Then just as suddenly as it began, the transformation faded. It turned away, vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind only silence and steaming footprints that sizzled against the wet ground. Jack knelt there for a long time, soaked and trembling, realizing the truth he could no longer deny. The creature he'd rescued wasn't a dog. It wasn't even from this world. For 3 days the forest was silent. No footprints. No distant howls. No sign of the creature at all. Jack searched every trail, every clearing, calling its name until his voice was hoarse. But the only answer he received was the wind moving through the trees. The cabin felt emptier than ever. The warmth gone, the fire cold. Every creak of wood made him turn, half expecting to see those golden eyes watching from the shadows. Yet they never appeared. What haunted him most wasn't fear anymore. It was absence. He hadn't realized how much the creature's presence had filled his world until it was gone. On the 4th night, the storm returned, softer this time, almost gentle. Jack sat by the fireplace, lost in thought, when a familiar sound broke the silence. A low, melodic whine. He froze, heart pounding. Slowly, he opened the door. There, just beyond the porch, stood the creature, soaked, trembling, but calm. Its fur shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and its golden eyes looked sad. Jack stepped forward, his voice breaking. "You came back." The creature lowered its head, pressing its forehead gently against his chest. For a moment it felt like time stopped, man and beast bound by something beyond understanding. But when Jack looked down again, he saw it, the mark on its shoulder glowing softly. A goodbye. The creature stepped back, eyes locked on his, and let out one final mournful howl that echoed through the valley. Then it turned and vanished into the trees, swallowed by fog and silence. Jack stood there long after it was gone, the echo of that sound lingering in his heart. He whispered into the wind, "Thank you," and though no one else would ever believe him, Jack knew the truth. The creature hadn't just been something he saved. It had been something that came to save him. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night became both a comfort and a torment. Jack returned to his daily routines, but everything felt changed. He'd often find himself staring into the forest, wondering where it had gone, and whether it was still watching. The silence of the cabin was heavier now, filled with questions that had no answers. Yet deep down he felt peace too. Whatever the creature truly was, it had protected him. From danger, from loneliness, from the emptiness he'd carried for years. Sometimes at night he swore he could still hear that distant, haunting call echoing through the trees, soft and sorrowful, as if reminding him he wasn't forgotten. Then one morning, months later, Jack received a call. It was Dr. Alara Winters. Her voice shook with disbelief. "Jack, we found something," she said. "A team in northern Alaska discovered footprints frozen deep beneath the ice, identical to the DNA sample you gave us. They're thousands of years old, but somehow fresh." Jack felt his breath catch. "So it's real?" She hesitated. "More real than we ever imagined. It's not just a lost species, not it's something beyond science. Something that shouldn't exist, but does." After the call, Jack drove to the edge of the forest and stood there for a long time, staring into the endless expanse of green. The wind whispered softly through the pines, carrying faint echoes of a sound he would never forget. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph, the one he'd taken months ago of a tiny puppy curled in his palm, eyes closed, helpless. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Whatever you were," he whispered, his voice trembling, "you changed my life." He placed the photo inside a wooden box on the mantel beside the fire, a quiet memorial for something that didn't belong to this world but had found its way into his heart. Outside, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the faintest golden glow shimmered between the branches, there for only a moment, then gone. Jack smiled through the tears in his eyes. Some stories, he realized, aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be felt.